Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm excited to have Suzanne Leal join me. Hi Suzanne.
Hi, Jackie. How you
And
going?
some of you might remember we've had Suzanne a few times in the group, so it's great to have you back. I think we've had you as author for the day and also had you for an interview before, so really great to be talking to you again.
Oh, it's really nice to be here. It's such a supportive group. When I was author for the day, I just you get to know people a little bit through the
Mm,
day, and
yeah.
what you've done, I think, Jackie, is to really bring together a whole lot of supportive, enthusiastic women. It's
Yeah,
a great.
thank you. Yeah. So a little bit about Suzanne for those who aren't familiar with her. She's the author of, and I can see your lovely covers in the back there, The Teacher's Secret, The Deceptions, and the junior YA readers novel Running with Ivan, and your latest one, The Watchful Wife. Hopefully you can see my copy there as well, and we can see your copy on the wall there. Suzanne began her legal career as a criminal lawyer and is now a senior member of the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal. And she's an experienced facilitator and host at community, corporate, and literary events. Suzanne is the founder of the Thursday Book Club, which is a relaxed, friendly book club connecting readers online. So thanks so much for joining us. I wonder if you want to start off by telling us about The Watchful Wife.
Yeah, look, thank you for that. So The Watchful Wife came out last year in July, and what it is, it's the story of a woman called Ellen, who's brought up in a very austere, very conservative, uber Protestant church where there are enormous rules, where you can't dance, where you have to
Mm,
dress extremely modestly, where there's fire and brimstone lectures. And we follow Ellen through her life as she tries to navigate the world around her. But perhaps most importantly, the book starts a bit in the future when Ellen has married and when two police women come to the door to arrest her husband.
mm. And yeah, it's pretty hard to not have too many spoilers because there are some really probably a bit twisty things that happen, and just wondering what was the idea you had for this book?
Look, what I what I have a history in, or have a history in criminal law. So I was a
Mm,
criminal lawyer, and I think that there's been a lot written in books that focus on crime from the perspective of either the police officer or the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator, or more and more also from the perspective of the victim or the complainant.
mm,
But I don't think there's been much, or at least not much that I've read, that comes from the perspective of the family. So
mm, mm,
sort of in my work and in the work of a lot of my friends, you see the families of people either accused of a crime or who are bringing a complaint against a crime, and it's
mm,
really quite stressful. And so I wanted
mm,
to look at it from that angle. So what's it like to be a woman who believes her husband's done nothing wrong, um, who finds himself arrested, and there seems to be a lot of evidence against him? I mean, how do
mm.
you navigate that? How do you navigate your work? How do you navigate your life? How do you navigate your marriage? And also for me, the challenge was, and how do you keep it a bit uplifting? So how do you keep it not too dismal, but sort of a bit funny, and despite the subject matter. So Ellen's quite a quirky character,
Mm.
and the challenge, I think, was to keep it a light read about an interesting and quite complicated matter.
Yeah, and like I hadn't really thought when reading it that it was different, but it's very true what you say that it isn't usually from the family point of view, and that's something I really enjoyed about it was that it was from the wife's point of view. And she certainly has quite an interesting religious following. How where did you get that idea from? Is that
Yeah, look, I was brought up in a sort of reasonably religious family, not a conservative family, very progressive family. My father was in his sort of second career a theologian, so I've always been I've been interested in the role of the church and how different it can be. So it can be very liberal, it can be very conservative, and there are some churches around and some people I know who have grown up pretty restrained or constrained by the church, which is their community. And you probably know people yourselves and your viewers, where everything, their whole childhood is focused around the church. And that can be a very good thing for a lot of people. But when it's a particularly controlling church, that can be hard. So I wanted to try and work out what would it be like to be a girl who really only fits in her church but has to go outside. So she has to go to school, and she's the only kid wearing a uniform down to her ankles. I mean, how is that? How does that help? How do you navigate your childhood and your school life when you're always the outsider?
And did you talk to anyone or read anything about people in maybe those situations?
Yeah. Look, I read a lot, and I attended a few church services, but one in particular where it was very austere, and it was very much like the church that I've called the Free Church of Kirkton, and that was really interesting. Like there were kids there, beautifully dressed, unlike my ragamuffins, not that they were there with me, and quiet. Like the kids were quiet. The women were covered with a hat, stockings, dresses, and I really felt like I'd stepped back about 60 years, and it really was like a different world. There's also been quite a lot of memoirs written from different types of churches, but I think often the experience where you've been completely immersed in an area is quite similar. So when you're reading memoirs of people from, Seventh-day Adventists or very Protestant churches or even more unusual churches, I think the experience is the same, that you're part of this group, this strong community, but that makes you an outsider in the mainstream.
And just want to say we've got a few people watching, so if you do have any questions, please type them in comments and I can read them out. Belinda said she has read and enjoyed The Watchful Wife, and she wonders what you like to read.
Okay, so I like to read fiction mostly, and I like to read. But recently, I suppose one book that really stood out for me, and it was a book that I gave a quote to, so I read it in the advanced form, is One Illumined Thread by Sally Collin James.
Okay,
and
I
it's
haven't heard
a pretty it's a very ambitious novel, and it sort of takes you from, it's a story of women, and it's the story of Mary and Elizabeth, who was Virgin Mary and Elizabeth, John the Baptist's mum. And so Sally takes us right to before the birth of Christ and really brings that area alive. And then she brings us to the 15th century, where she introduces us to the wife of a painter, and then a contemporary story. But it was just compelling. I mean, to span 2,000 years is pretty tricky, and she did that very well. So, I mean, that's the sort of book I like. I'm on the Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival board, and whilst crime hasn't always been my go-to, I'm really enjoying getting to know criminal writers or crime writers. They're a really generous bunch, and they're a close-knit bunch, and it's clever. I mean, what I like to see is the workings of a book. I mean, how you keep secrets and how you reveal what's going to happen. So Dervla McTiernan I like a lot in terms of her writing, and I'm in the French book club as well, and so people choose a French book, and I often listen to that. And there's I'm listening to one called don't know what's in English, but it's veiller sur elle, which is look after her, I think. And
Okay.
it's
So you're fluent in French?
yeah. Look. I mean, I one of the reasons I joined the club and they're lovely people is so I practice reading more. But I'm
Yeah.
busy and I listen to the audiobooks because you can do stuff at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Take, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's me at the moment.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And the Watchful Wife, like you said, it's been out for a little while now. What sort of feedback have you had from readers? And maybe is there something that you'd like to share with us that surprised or touched you? Or
Yeah, look, what I've found, I don't know if this has surprised me, but it's been something across the board that people really like Ellen. So she's a bit of an odd character. She's a bit quirky. She's outspoken, and yet she seems to have really struck a chord for readers. In fact, I mean, and it's lovely getting reader feedback. I mean, that's the best thing. It makes, because you send this book out and you're not quite sure where it's going, and to have personal feedback and even feedback that's not great is wonderful because you're sparking a conversation. I think what was interesting, I got an email some months ago which said that this woman said, I grew up exactly like Ellen
oh,
and I
really?
couldn't beat her and I wondered if she'd sort of been watching my life. And I think that was more the childhood. But when this is a fictional woman and it's a fictional story, but when you can bring your readers into it and it becomes as real to them as their lives, I mean, that's probably what makes this whole job something I keep going back to, despite all the other issues, with how much work it is and what it does. But I think connecting with readers is wonderful.
And you do a lot of author interviews, which yeah, I've really enjoyed listening to some of the ones that you do, and I love talking to authors, and so I'm a bit jealous sometimes of some of the ones that I see you talking to. Just wondering, do you have a favourite author to interview?
Oh, do I have a favourite author to interview? I you would know, Jackie, that it's an intellectual exercise interviewing, and the job is to make it look easy as you do, whereas you're always sort of trying to keep ahead. You're trying to work out where you go next. So it's almost mathematical, and that's hard work, but it's also challenging. So sometimes difficult people are interesting to interview because you need to get in somehow. And sometimes that's sort of more challenging and more satisfying when it works than someone who's easy. Having said that, there's an author called Amanetta Fauna who is lives in London, and she, like, it was some years ago, and I think she'd been perhaps shortlisted for the Booker, and she was just phenomenal. She was just a really clear-eyed, clever woman. And I think in the other one, I interviewed Carlos Ruiz Zafón, who sadly died quite young, and he's the author of Shadow of the Wind, who it's sold in Spanish and across the world. I think 23 million copies, probably 30 now. And I was getting a bit smart for that interview. And I tried to get in everything on one piece of paper because on a stage, I was in the Ros Packer Theatre, I think, for the Sydney Writers' Festival. So I thought, I know what, I'll put it in 8 font, and then I've got everything there.
Okay.
The lights come on, and the lights basically sort of, blind you and make it harder to read again. I looked and I couldn't see anything. And when you just sort of stop for a moment, and I just saw him raise his eyebrow like, up for this. I thought, all right, let's go. So it's managing those hiccups, during COVID. What happens when things drop out? And it's much more work than doing what I'm doing, talking about myself. But it's I mean, do you find it exhilarating when it works well?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And Tom Keneally, I love speaking to him.
Yeah.
I mean, hard to
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
You just got to give up and just say, go for it, then try and rein it in. But the generosity of the man, and and often debut authors, they're so excited, they're so published, and you can just feel the excitement just sort of bouncing off them, and that's always nice.
And is there any author that you haven't interviewed yet that you really wished you could?
Yeah. Who would I? That's a good question. I've interviewed Tim Winton. That was interesting.
Oh yes, yeah.
I would like to interview. I would like to get to know his work better. You know who I'd like to interview? Leal Slimani. She's a French author, and she wrote the book called Lullaby and Adele, and then a completely different book called in French it's Dans le pays des autres, so in the country of others, and she's I'm pretty sure it's Algerian French, and such different books. And Lullaby is about from the beginning, the nanny has murdered the two children.
Oh, okay.
Shocking. And then we go back to work out how that's happened.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be the one. I'd really like to speak to her.
Yeah. And would you interview her in French?
Oh, would I interviewed her in French? Look, I'm probably up to it just.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for anyone who, speaks another language or who knows someone well who speaks another language, it's your personality goes a bit. So the nuances aren't there, and you've got to be on your game when you're interviewing.
Yeah.
I could do it. I mean, if someone was interviewing me in French, that would be fine.
Yeah.
But I think because interviewing is a more difficult job. I look, if I had no option, I'd just sort of do it. But I think the nuances. My preference, just like I don't write in French, my preference would be English because I control it more.
Yeah. And Belinda's got another question. She wonders if you know your twists and endings when you start writing.
I know my ending when I start writing. So I know often how it begins, always how it will end. But it's the getting there that's the problem. And like with the watchful wife, without giving things away, I mean, you stumble upon questions. It's like, well, how can this happen? What needs to occur for this to be able to happen? And then, then you start with something that's not very credible, and then you just have to rework it. So I'm trying to think which ones I had. Because I knew it was going to happen in the end and what had happened. And that's one of the largest twists. So I knew who was involved. I knew more or less what they'd done, but getting them there. And look, in a way, it probably has to be a little bit unknown, because otherwise you get pretty bored pretty quickly, because it takes a long time, and there needs to be something you don't know. I'm not a pantser, so I don't write by the seat of my pants, but I do need to not know everything.
And what do you like when you're reading a book? What draws you to a book and draws you into the story?
I think honesty and generosity and a strong voice. I mean, I was people give you manuscripts to read sometimes, and a man years ago gave me a manuscript, and he said it in America, and I said, well, why is it in America? And he said, because the sales will be better in America because there's so many people.
Yeah.
And look, that's that, and he was in a sort of professional career where that sort of thing you'd have to think about. But you lose some of the authenticity from that and the honesty. I think those books where you know that people have been driven to write them. Helen Garner, for example. I mean, Helen Garner just crucifies herself with every book. I mean, she doesn't protect herself. She lets everything out there. And The First Stone is a great example. But even when Jo Chinque, she doesn't hide, or would appear anything, and certainly not her diaries. And I think the author that strips themselves, it may not be good for them, but it's certainly good for the reader.
Yeah.
Because it just buzzes with honesty.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And what are you working on at the moment?
So I've got I'm working on a kid's book. So last year I had 2 books out. So I had Running with Ivan, which is a middle grade reader for like 9 to 13, 14-year-olds. And this one is also for the same age group. And it's the first time, so I've got a contract with HarperCollins, and it's the first time I've been given a contract without the book being finished.
Oh, okay.
I had the contract on the basis of, I think, 6 chapters. And of course, it's very flattering that my publisher, Lisa Berryman, has that trust in me. But it's also quite a different way to work, because normally I would just beaver away, get to the end, get again, and when I can finally let go of it, show it to my agent, and there it goes. But this one seems more like, I mean, I'm enjoying the story, but it's more like a job, because you know that there's an expectation, so you can work to the expectation rather than making up a false deadline for yourself. And so it's historical, couple of protagonists, sort of a girl and a boy, and they each have their own story. And I've been told not to say too much about it, but I'm liking it. I mean, historical's hard because
So are you able to what sort of time era is it set on?
Yeah, look, it seems to become my specialty, but it's sort of wartime Europe.
Okay, yeah.
Country this time. But, you know, it's things. It's almost a break writing something contemporary, because you can see around. But whereas if you're writing something historical, and just all those day-to-day things about, you know, what utensils, what food,
what working up,
So and I've got an adults book where I've got it fairly well advanced, but I'm just letting that sit until the kids one is finished. Back to that one. The adult one's contemporary, so hopefully that'll be a bit of a break.
And Kelly's got a good question. She wonders if you find it easier to write for children or for adult fiction.
Yeah, you know, that's one of my, you know, hubris moments. I thought when I had this kids idea, I mean, how hard can it be to write for kids? So it's shorter.
Shorter and
more simple. But I must say that was the book that required the most working. In fact, I got the contract with HarperCollins, and it was a third-person story. And my first conversation with my publisher, Lisa Berryman, was her on the phone. She's got a very, very cultured voice, and she said, "Great story, Suzanne. How do you feel about the first person?" That is, can you rewrite it in the first person?
And you had to read.
And she was right, and I did it, but it needed, it's time travel, and I thought, oh, how hard can that be? Just throw them back in time. But, you know, I probably went a little bit ignorantly into the whole kids domain, because, I mean, there's all these devices that people use for time travel, and kids are a difficult audience. I mean, if kids don't believe you, they just don't believe you. And even if everything's imaginary, they need to know that this time travel device works and it has its internal logic. Yeah, so I would say so far harder. I mean, I'm hoping this book isn't time travel, so I don't need any time travel devices. But I think if I've learned anything with all the writing, it's don't worry too much first go. Just get the first draft down. It can be rubbish. It can be just awful, but just get it down, and then mentally you've got something to work with.
Yeah.
It's not how everyone writes, but it's how I have to write to keep my confidence up, I think.
Okay. And I'm interested to know then, like, before I ask you about reader feedback, how have you found feedback from the readers of Running with Ivan?
Good. I mean, look, good. I suppose in terms of, you know, public recognition, it's been shortlisted for the Premier's History Award. It was shortlisted for the Premier's History Awards and for the Historical Novel Prize. So I suppose that makes you think, at least amongst your peers or amongst the industry, that it's hit a mark. For kids, I mean, that's the beauty of going to schools. And this book, Running with Ivan, there's a girl Olinda, but basically it's a story of two boys. So it's Ivan and Leo. And it seems to me, and I think so children's publishers would support this, that there's less written for boys than there are for girls. And girls will read books about boys.
Yeah.
To read books about girls. And I've got three boys and one girl. My three boys are bigger. And so I know boys better. And I think what I've liked is having the reactions, particularly from boys. So I've been to a few boys' schools, and I've sort of spoken to any classes from year 4 to year 8, and probably actually 5, 6, 7, 8. And what the questions you get back from the year 8ers are very different from the year 5s. So the year 5s are interested in the contemporary part of the story. Leo's mum's died and his dad's remarried, and it's how he navigates that family. Whereas the year 8 kids are very interested in the history. So it's wartime history. And I think we assume perhaps that kids know more about the Second World War than they do, but there's certainly an interest. So, that they know the name of Adolf Hitler, but how that rise happened, they don't. And I like that. And also, I like it when those quiet kids wait till the end of a session and then just sidle up to you.
Yeah.
I really love that. And you know that they're not kids that speak to strangers easily. And that's what I like.
Yeah, no, it must give a lot of satisfaction.
It's fun. I hadn't expected the school visits to be much fun. I mean, when you're starting out, I mean, you've got to make sure you've got to keep like an amphitheatre sometimes entertained, and you get better at that. And I think it gives you more and more admiration for teachers.
Yeah.
That can day in, day out. Because I do an hour, I'm like, okay, give me coffee.
Yeah, no, it can be a tough audience.
Yes.
And before we spoke, like you are involved in a lot of writer festivals and interviewing authors and that. What have you got coming up?
Yeah, I've got a few things coming up. I'm going to be in Toowoomba and Brisbane in March. I'll make sure I put everything on my website if people are around. It'd be great to see you. And I'm not sure how many have been announced, but I'm hoping Words on the Waves, which is in the Central Coast. And there's others coming up, but I think they might be embargoed so far.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying some of the smaller regional festivals. There's an enormous amount of work that gets put in, often voluntary, and the communities really come together. And then they're often the most fun because they're small and they're just lovely to be part of.
Yeah, well, I hope I see you at one of the festivals.
Oh, I'd love to.
Sure
Look, I will make sure that as soon as they come up, I'll pop them on the website.
Yeah, I'll have a look out and yeah. No, well, thanks so much for talking with me. It's been great talking to you again, and hope everyone goes out and gets The Watchful Wife. I have to say I really enjoyed it and loved the wife's perspective.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And look, congratulations on your book club. I know how much work it takes to sort of keep the community going. And we do it in quite different ways. I mean, you've got an enormous Facebook following and mine's more sort of weekly online.
Yeah.
But it's really great. And I think post-COVID as well, people are gaining such support from each other. In fact, actually, before I go, another book I've just finished, which is called Grace Under Pressure.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Fabulous about the community of women. Gee, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, it was terrific, funny and clever, and again, I suppose what I try and do, which is you deal with something that's not necessarily laughing matter, but you do it lightly.
Yeah.
So that I spot the reader in before they realise, and it keeps. I think that's the skill that Tori really shows to us. Keep this light, and then every now and then the reader thinks, oh.
And I think also really relating to things that happen to a lot of people makes you sort of feel, oh, maybe it's not quite so, because it actually happens to other people as well. It's not just me, and realising that as well.
And it's a comfort, it's a real comfort to know that you're part of a community, even in a fictional sense.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks so much. Hope I talk to you again soon,
Oh,
and
I hope so
thanks
too.
for the questions and for the people who joined in.
Yes, thanks. I think it's Kelly and Belinda, wasn't it? It's and I look forward to popping in and out of the club and the Facebook site.
Yeah, no, that will be great. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.